try it really quick? Okay, well, I won't be able to know until it downloads. Never mind.
Oh,
Pause it for now, but hoping that that button didn't affect anything.
if not, what are we gonna do?
So
You know?
awkward, right? I know. Just
Yeah.
video, no audio. Wow.
Ask, what does a presentation look like if I'm trying to have this conversation with another partner? So then you can see examples of like slides or PowerPoint or information that we tend to share to get folks started with this conversation. So it's kind of twofold. So we'll give folks another minute or two. I know Steve is familiar with California Teaching Fellows, but for the rest of the group, have either of you ever sat in one of our presentations before? Because I just don't want to repeat if you've seen some of this information before. No. Okay, great. No. Okay, yay. Awesome. Okay, let's see. And Daly City, awesome. Oh, yay, Tara is here. Tara joined earlier. And her audio is connecting, so we'll give her a moment to get connected. Hi, Tara, welcome back. I'm glad you were able to make it.
Me too. Thanks, you guys.
Yes, awesome. We started this discussion at the first workshop and it was really good. So I'm excited that Tara, you're here so we can continue having that conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and jumping into the presentation, and we'll start welcoming folks. Let me give one. Let's see here. Okay, let's share. We'll get the presentation started and we're going to multitask a little bit here. Okay, and Tara, let me get all my screens set up. Tara, you're from the California Department of Ed, so you're really looking at a zoomed out version of this work as well, right? Trying to support urban and rural communities.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
I've been trying to improve my game when it comes to supporting rural districts, but I'm really just getting started. But yeah, I advise all kinds of districts about some of their strategic planning and like what's appropriate to use Title II funds for in particular, but we focus a lot on retention of educators of color. That's kind of the center of what we do, but we're very focused on retention of everyone, of course, in this climate, and recruitment and diversification in general. So this is the name of the office where I work in the department.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for being here. And as we think about this strategy, a lot of folks assume it's a recruitment strategy, but it is also a retention strategy, especially for folks of color. So I'll go a little bit into detail about that piece, but if you can imagine, if you have early integration and making folks feel welcomed and you give them the hands-on experience that they need to build their confidence and to start to have them build relationship with school district leadership so they feel a sense of belonging, it does help with retention. So I just wanted to put that on folks' radar, because sometimes people just want to think of expanded learning as a place to grab folks from, but it's a lot more, there's a lot more integration in it than I think we realize, including during the induction process that we're finding. So just wanted to say that piece. Awesome. And I'm just checking, if you look at me looking at the side, it's just my second screen and looking at the chat box. My name is Malia Villareal. I should probably introduce myself. And I'm with the California Teaching Fellows Foundation. And we are a nonprofit based out of the Central Valley. And we serve now 6 counties. Soon to be, we'll be up in the Sacramento area in fall, but mostly in Merced, Madera, Fresno, Tulare, and Kings counties. And I'll go into a little bit more about that in a moment. So let's go over our agenda quickly so you all know what we'll be discussing today. So we'll do welcome and introduction. So we've already done that piece. I'll do a quick overview of the foundation and our model. I'll show you an example of a pathway we've mapped out from high school all the way to credentialed teacher and placement. And we'll look at potential partnerships to consider, funding to consider, and then we'll really start discussing local examples and discussion. From our experience of doing this presentation many times over the years, I've found that this can be very nuanced work. It can be as small or as big along the whole pipeline continuum. And every local context is different. Every local partnership is different. And I'm kind of glad we have a small, intimate group so we can really dive into specific examples. So while I'll be presenting to you information, we may take moments and breaks in between to uplift questions. So please feel free to unmute or drop a question in the chat box and interrupt me as we go through, because this is going to be interactive and it's going to be more of a conversation. So I can specifically address the questions you have, because this is too big of an idea. And I want to make sure that you can take home actionable items to your specific local context. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so we're going to jump into it a bit, and I apologize if you see my puppy off to the side. She came to say hi next to me. But this first slide here is just a little bit about the organization. It's information from our annual report from last year. And the reason we like this slide is to show we serve in both rural communities and urban communities. I like to point out that Fresno is actually larger than Sacramento, Miami, Atlanta. It's actually a very large city that folks don't realize just because we're in the Central Valley. And we see a lot of differences, right, between our urban and rural communities. We also serve in rural communities that are an hour away from any university and doesn't have internet access and has only PO boxes and doesn't have access to like running water, right? Like basic necessities. So like I said, we've seen that every partnership is very different, and rural communities from our experience have less resources. And it doesn't mean it's just rural, just smaller districts may have less resources. So there are strategies that you can use to still do this work and bring folks together collectively to bring in all their funding and resources and human capital to the table to make this work. So it can be a regional approach or not a huge region, but a semi-regional approach to this work as well. So just a little overview of the foundation. So our strategy really looks at 4 different pillars. So we're specific with and have intentionality with recruitment, with professional development, personal development, and quality hands-on experiences, and a feedback loop with the hands-on experiences. So I'll go quickly into these strategies. So most of our teaching fellows want to go and pursue a career in education. We had primarily recruited from colleges and universities. I think there's about 15 to 20. So any college, any accredited college or university we work with in the Central Valley. Now with the pandemic, we saw enrollment numbers were low. We also found enrollment numbers weren't as diverse as we would hope for. So if we're trying to diversify the teacher workforce, we can't keep going to the same pool of college students if it's not diverse, right? So in Fresno State, they have numbers on the number of African-American males that are in the liberal studies department, and it's very small, right? And that person or a few people probably have worked with the foundation at one point in their career. So if there isn't enough there, then what do we need to do is obviously open it up to non-college students so we can increase the funnel for folks to potentially go into the career in education. So that's just a little bit about recruitment, and it's very localized. We don't take folks and implant them into communities. We really try to find folks from the community, understand the community, develop the cultural competencies in that community, and we build the pipeline for folks to stay in those communities. A lot of times folks get displaced from certain communities because the pathways are only set up to funnel into the big districts who have the resources to build a funnel or partnership into their communities. Same thing with universities. It's like if you're a district close to a university, then you're probably going to be the pipeline strategy. But we really have to think differently about creating these pipelines to create equity and access for all communities. So that really is at the heart of our model and what we really try to push forward. All right. So the next slide is we offer professional development. And this kind of comes from a multiple different avenues, but we pay our teaching fellows on Saturdays to go to professional development conferences that we put on once a month. We do a Teach, Lead, Succeed training, what we call for our new hires. We've upped the hours from 32 hours of paid professional development to 40 hours with this new funding. So that was one thing that we did push for. So we're at 40 hours now. And their trainings it's very similar across, I'm sure, different after school providers, but it's like the classroom management and mandated reporter and health and safety and cultural relevance. And you could see the list here, right? So there's a plethora of different workshops that we provide, and it's very much tailored to the school district needs and the needs of the time. So obviously when COVID happened and we were virtual, our professional development would be, how do you engage, students in social emotional learning through the virtual lens, right? It can be a lot more challenging given that context. So what we find is that a lot of our teacher prep partners didn't realize how sophisticated the expanded learning field really is, and in their training and the competencies that that we develop in after school. So I'll get a little bit more into competencies moving forward, but we found that that was a big disconnect to move this work forward, because obviously K through 12 district partners have one set of language and perception, institutions of higher ed, community colleges, and then credentialing programs, and then CBOs or expanded learning providers. Obviously, we have our own lingo. But what we found through conversations is that there's a lot of synergy and overlap happening, and we can do a lot more to kind of bridge those gaps. So, and some of these professional development workshops come from the universities or come from the health and human services, right? Mandated reporter. Now that we do them virtual, we get folks from across the country to come in and provide these trainings. And we also have a teacher pipeline where folks can sign up for workshops for their professional development, specifically to becoming a teacher. And our university partners are the ones who put that training on for our folks. So there's a lot that can be done in the professional development space, and is a big leverage piece for sure. So the next pillar is the personal development side. So when we think about diversifying the teacher workforce, and when we think about engaging expanded learning, the expanded learning workforce in this work, we did a survey with all of our staff a couple years ago, and we asked why they were leaving, right? Why were they dropping out of school, or why were they leaving the foundation? And the realities were that they were the only income provider in their families, right? They were dealing with food insecurity. Their car wasn't working. They were dealing with mental health or domestic violence, right? They were dealing with a lot of barriers, just like our kiddos. And we knew we had to address the personal side, right? If we wanted to address the hard skills, because they will fall through the cracks and not get through this pathway unless we really support the personal development side. And I'll tell you a little nuggets of things we found along the way of some barriers. And one thing I will say is that a lot of the time, the workforce doesn't even know how to articulate their barriers. So personal conversations with your workforce in the local context is so critical, because you will find through conversations and them doing storytelling, you will be able to notice that there's a barrier happening. So I'll give you, actually, I'm going to go to the next slide. The hands-on experience, which we all know is about the 725 hours of hands-on experience every year. It's paid, right? We're above $15 an hour now, but it is paid experience, 180 school days a year with a ratio of 20:1. Again, a lot of our teacher prep folks didn't realize, or their eyes really open up. They're like, whoa, 725 hours of paid hands-on experience working with kids. You got to be kidding me. And we have sustainable funding that's already happening through ACES 21st Century and ELOP, right? And that's not typical for teacher prep. Where we also found with this hands-on experience piece is that the cultural competencies that are developed through hands-on experience. So you can imagine the difference of actually working with kids and families day in and day out, and how you learn about the local culture versus learning about it in a university classroom from a professor who probably has never even taught in that district, right? And so this is the big leverage piece of engaging the workforce and expanded learning for the clinical hours or hands-on experience well before they go into their credential. So a lot of our workforce, have at least 700 hours of hands-on experience before they go into their student teaching hours. And most of the time they get double, triple, quadruple the amount of hours our future teachers get in their student teaching, right? And another reason why this is so critical when it comes to the teacher pathway and diversifying the teacher pathway is this. We asked our teaching fellows, like, what was it about your experience in after school that really got you to become a teacher and start teaching in the classroom? And one of our teaching fellows uplifted this was, she said she was afraid to even think about going into the credential program or working with kids. She's like, I don't think I could ever do it. That seems so prestigious, or that's so above me, right? She's first gen, comes from a Title I community. And she said that it was the opportunity to learn in our teaching fellow academies, in the classroom, and then the very next day go to site with kids and see it in real time happening, right, with their kids, and saying, oh wow, I heard, Mr. Ray talked about, addressing these students in this particular situation, and it literally happened the next day, and now I can actually practice it in a safe environment, not when you're a credentialed teacher where you're in charge of, so much pressure, right, to be a first year teacher, but you're learning this, and then you have the safety nets of your site coordinator and your site lead, and for us, our liaison. So you have this safe space to make mistakes and learn hands-on, to develop the confidence to even go through with the application to become for a credential program and become a teacher. So this is well before they even get into the credential. We have to build their confidence and reduce the ivory tower syndrome. And it cannot just come from the universities or the school districts. They are afraid and they feel like they don't belong, and they will not take advantage of the resources that our universities provide. So you have all these coaches and career centers and outreach folks, but if it says, the university name under their title, these folks aren't even going to want to take the conversation because they're afraid and they feel like they don't belong. But if you can get a CBO partner or employer who really starts to cultivate their confidence and work with them slowly over time, and then does the handoff. Once we do the handoff then to the university, I love Brooke Barrios, and she's now at Fresno County Office of Ed. And I always say, Brooke's one of us. She comes from after school. She gets it. She's going to take care of you. She's got you, right? And then they're like, okay, that's awesome. And then their walls come down and they're willing to go through the process. Or we've had teaching fellows tell us, when they're trying to apply for their credential, we put on workshops for them. They're like, I don't know if this course qualifies to give me the waiver, and it's really scary to think about reaching out to the commission on teacher credentialing. Like, I don't know who that is, and that's scary, but it's easier if Brooke is here telling me and you guys are telling me what I can do, right? Or if you can make that introduction. So there's so many unspoken barriers that is keeping our folks from going into the teaching and credential programs. And then the last one is, and I'll tell you a recent story. Our folks, if we want to diversify the teacher workforce and engage others, our folks have to work and pay the bills. They cannot afford to take off a year or two in their credential programs to get their teaching credential and then go into a profession where they may or may not even be making enough money to pay off their loans. Like, they just can't do it. I have a teaching fellow who reached out. She graduated magna cum laude with her liberal studies degree. She is an only parent, and she's deathly afraid because she's going to start her credential program. And she said, Malia, I still need to work, but I have unpaid teacher student teaching hours during the day, and then I have my coursework at night. I have no time. Like, when am I supposed to work? And she's freaking out. And she graduated magna cum laude. I mean, she is a bright individual, but the fact that she needed to still work may have, right, like created a situation where she was going to have to take time off. And so really that's when the wraparound supports come into play to help her, coach her, tell her she can do it. Let's find the resources. But a lot of first gen folks don't have that access to folks to be able to coach them through the process, right? So that's why we need to create systems that allows us to do so. Gosh, I'm going on tangents, but it's all very important nuggets that we're learning. Okay, so the next slide is, and we'll get back to this slide, but we really started to map out, because when we think about teacher pipeline work and intersections with expanded learning, it really does follow from high school student, even middle school student, really, high school student all the way to credentialed teacher, and being placed as a certified teacher. Excuse me. So what we did with one partnership was we started to really map out the pathway, and then we found which partner was going to do what to support along this pathway. And this is very high level, and we'll, like I said, we'll dive more into this, but I wanted to show you all. There's like the high school, right, and CT and dual enrollment, there's community college time, there's their university and undergrad, and then there's like the credentialing and resident piece, and then obviously then becoming a teacher and hopefully still working in the communities that they came from, right? So today's discussion, I really want you to take a moment. Oh, I just saw Bill. Hi, Bill. Welcome. So today's discussion will really be up to you all and what sections you think you want to focus on and dive deeper into. Okay, so if you can, in the chat box, start writing what you think you're interested in discussing. Is it high school pipelines? Is it community college partnerships? Is it the residency or credential piece? Is it all of it? I'm just curious. So if you can drop in the chat box if there's something specific you want to talk about, so we can start the discussion. So Tara, I'm also reading your comment. Would you say that regarding the need for personalization or personalized support, teaching fellows facing obstacles are typically not aware of the supports that exist that they could access? And yes, one is they're not aware of the supports. The other is they're afraid to take advantage of the supports because they feel like they're not worthy, that they don't belong. It's just scary, for lack of a better term. And then the third thing is that a lot of our first gen folks are working multiple jobs. They may be parents and trying to do school. They are so overwhelmed that they don't even have time to take it. Like, they don't have time to prioritize taking advantage of these resources because they don't understand, or they get pressure from their families. Like, you can't take time off to invest in your future, right? That's really hard to do. I was one of those. I was a first gen college student, single mother, and I was working full time, going to school full time. And there was a lot of opportunities I could have taken advantage of. And my professors would tell me, like, you're bright and brilliant, but like, you're not taking advantage of all these things. My day started at 12 a.m. At 12 a.m. so I can get my work done. And I would go to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. That was my reality. And that's the reality of a lot of our folks. So, but if we can create spaces where, like, hey, I really think this is going to be good for you. It's going to be worth it. And this is why. Because also their families, we have teaching fellows come to us crying because they said, my parents are telling me, why are you working full time and investing in going to college and working on your career? Like, you need to be working full time with us to support the family. So they're constantly going through that pressure and internal dialogue themselves, right? And that guilt to do anything selfless. I mean, it's a lot. I'm like, it's a lot, but it is the realities, right? And we can't keep setting up systems hoping that changes for folks, because it's not, you know. Okay, so high school students, how do we bring high school students into your on-ramp? So we have some exciting stuff happening with high school pipelines, so I'll share a little bit about that. Do we face a challenge in getting those that set teacher credentialing policy to see the opportunity that after school expanded learning can provide for gaining a more diverse and experienced teaching workforce? So, Steve, what we found with teacher credentialing policy, there's a couple of things. Technically, according to Ed Code, practicum hours could be counted in after school if we had someone with a credential that was observing and met all the TPE observation expectations. So there are some things according to Ed Code we can technically do. It's a culture shift that has to happen at the commission. We've already started conversations. Sterling has had conversations. CSU system is on board. It comes down to the local conversations, right? The universities hold a lot more control than we realize and have a lot more flexibility than we realize when it comes to credentialing. So I'll give you an example. We've had a university partner that's like, oh yeah, I signed off on the clinical hours. I was like, can we talk a little bit more about that piece? Like, why, if you're telling me you have all these courses that align with what's happening in expanded learning during their liberal studies program, why can't that be shortened by a year? Like, let's work smarter, not harder, you know? So there is more flexibility. It's a culture shift along the whole continuum. And there's a lot of local control that we don't realize. So I hope that answered your question, Steve. I think we collectively do need to collect the letters from the CSU system. And then Tara, I mean, Tara sounds like she's doing great work too, and it's getting the CDE and Tony Thurman's office on board with, it's not just recruiting from the field, it's working and integrating with the field and teacher prep, especially as you get closer to the residency and credential piece. I hope that answered your question. Then how do we overcome it? So Steve was asking, how do we overcome the challenge of getting recognized? The next slide, we started to do an overlap of teacher performance expectations and competencies that are happening in after school. Data collection is another big one. What I'm really hoping is that we use ELOP funding to fund say a retired teacher who still holds a credential to start doing the bridging regular school day and after school and teacher performance expectation observations and aligning that with quality standards and observations that are happening in after school, and start to articulate what does that look like, because that also can be very local and at the local university level too of what they're trying to observe. Yeah, so Tara, I'll show you the next slide. We have a crosswalk there. Yeah, and we need models and proofs of concepts as well so folks can see. We have a lot of momentum, like the National Center for Teacher Residencies is well aware of our work and helped us through a community of practice. So they understand it too. It's getting the universities and someone willing to co-create learning experiences together. So we're getting there. It's just starting to be where the rubber meets the road. I hope that makes sense. And we're, like I said, we're getting there and we're learning a lot and bridging those gaps a lot. But it's hard to get a system who's always been the one who preps our future teachers and educates our future teachers to be open to expanded learning, also bringing something beautiful to the table. So that's why we say the cultural competencies and the hands-on experience are the two big leverage pieces, and workforce should be at the table. Because it's also a lot of finger pointing that we find, right? So there's districts have their own perceptions like, well, we need X, Y, Z, or here's our barriers. And universities like, gosh, we're trying to do this, but we need the districts to do this piece. So communities of practices and bringing folks together are really critical to move this needle forward too. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch up with the chat. And Tara, you had your hand up. Did you want to jump in?
I think you offered so much useful information, Malia. I think I was gonna respond to one of the questions in the chat, like to add to what you're saying, but I think it's totally unnecessary unless people want to, get to me directly in the chat. I'm happy to speak to like, from the CDE and to experience that I have at the state level. But I know I had a follow-up for you with respect to supporting the teaching fellows, but at the same time, I'm taking notes on everything you're saying. It's so exciting. I'm really focused right now on helping develop proposals for after school pipelines, like for the CDE to use what we already have and the commission, to create those and support the ones that are already being created without us. And also, I am planning to at least propose a legislative solution to creating pipelines for the next session. So I don't know.
Let's
I'm
stay
like overwhelmed.
connected. Yes,
Yeah, seriously.
because to Steve's point, we have to look at like the state level, and we have some ideas of what legislation could look like. We were just still learning, and then COVID happened. And so we would love to work with you. And if there's anything the foundation can do, and there's a lot of expanded learning statewide and advocacy groups that would, I'm sure, get on board and would love your support, and how we can also support you in creating that legislation, getting momentum for that legislation, reaching out to our legislators, because we've been talking to our legislators for years now about this model. So anything that we can do, if you want us to speak in hearings, we've done that as a field before. So whatever it takes, we would love. So let's see. And then, sorry, I'm trying to catch up with the question. Proof of concept. Okay, sorry. I'm just I'm trying to multitask here. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the slide. Why am I double clicking? This happened last presentation. Okay, so this is one example of a crosswalk with the TPEs and some competencies in after school. So this one was ASAP Connect and NAA. And Lupita, can you drop in the, we did a community of practice with California After School Network and NCTR, and there was a report that was generated, and this came from that report. And there's a YouTube video of me speaking, and also with our other partners, about this type of model, and NCTR. So Paving the Way is a great tool. And then Education Trust did a report on a natural fit, and we were written into that. That was well before we learned a lot more these past couple of years, but it's also a great resource and learning and tool to start talking to others to legitimize the work that we're doing. So we started this competency crosswalk. The next step is to start creating an observation tool that really does bridge the two, right? Like making it make sense. Because if you look at number one, is like engaging and supporting all students in learning, like that can look vague. And in a local context for teacher TPEs, they may wanting to observe one thing in that community. And so we would have to figure out how to really bridge it with day-to-day observations, if that makes sense. So that is probably a tangible next step in this process, but this is at least a good overview and a good tool to use. So I'm going to move along because I feel like this one alone we could talk a lot about, but this is a big leverage piece, obviously. Okay, so another question we get a lot is about like, who do we partner with, or who are the potential partners? Like, how do you even do this? And again, it's very local. So it's going to be, we work with Career Tech Education and their teacher prep, or early early childhood learning. So CT, we work with Valley ROP, so ROP programs, and then dual enrollment is a beautiful place too, because a lot of times they like to do clinical hours. So that's a great partnership for high school pipelines. And I have another slide to talk a little bit more about high school pipelines. And then any folks looking at career exploration or pathways at a school district, right? There's a lot of those folks on campuses. It's important to get superintendents and leadership on board, because obviously it starts at the top. And so for them to understand, and they're obviously dealing with teacher retention issues and recruitment issues and diversification issues. So really finding the superintendents to get on board. And then you want to include your principals and your district HR folks if you can, depending on the continuum, mostly when you get into the residency and credential programs. But, you know, then you can go into like, well, what is your projected needs, right, in your district and the coming needs, and what are your gaps, and how do we work together, and what funding do you have? And this is the funding we have we can bring to the table, right? Obviously, teacher retention and recruitment personnel, county offices of education are great tools and resources as well, especially if you're working in a rural community and need to pull that don't have the resources to do a teacher pathway. But if you get a county involved and get multiple districts working together, then you can leverage, you know, multiple buckets of resources and human resources to coordinate a program. So these are just some examples of school district partners that can be involved. College or university partners is your early ed or your education departments, and early ed, especially now with universal TK and expanded learning, a huge opportunity there. Career centers and internship offices are always really important to bring to the table. Counselors too, when you look at school schedules and alignment, they have a lot of insight. Folks interested in guided pathways, because enrollment's down and they're trying to diversify the college student enrollment. So university folks who are interested in recruiting and diversifying their college students, we are a great partner because we're like, hey, like a lot of times people convert, right? Our conversion rate from non-teaching major to teaching major every year is about 2 to 5%. So we can help recruit for you and get people in love and bring them into the family and send them over to you all. So they usually are interested. And then it could be the dean, the chair, instructors are always important, president, counselors. Sometimes you'll have a president who is innovative and gets it, and maybe a dean, but it has to really make sure it trickles down through all of the partners to actually make it work the way it should. Because you may have a president who gets how you could do integration, but then when it comes to maybe your residency coordinator, they're like, I'm just going to recruit from you. Like, I'm too busy. I'm not going to, you know, really go there. I mean, we've had people in charge of residency programs who we email personally, like, because our students needed help applying, and they're like, they didn't take it seriously. They're like, that's not our job. Our job is just to coordinate a residency program. It's not my job to make sure people can actually apply and that I diversify my, and that can happen. And that can happen even with the most progressive, institutions. Sometimes it could just, you got to really make sure everyone is on board. So anyway, these are just some examples of partners, and it all depends on who's moving the work, who's willing to move the work in this type of way too, right? And then getting them on board. And it's great to have leaders on both sides to uplift the work. So it's important to get superintendents and school districts to pull on the system. Like, we need these folks. They're diverse. We love them. They're great in after school. They make teachers. We need more of this. And then, obviously the university partners' willingness to do the work. And universities are saying they don't have enough funding a lot of times for the personnel to really be embedded in the community. So that's another policy change or funding thing to look at as well. But I'm like, what time? I'm trying to see Lupita, what time does our 2:45? Okay. All right, we're doing okay. Okay, so a lot of folks ask about funding. I don't have Title II on here, but and I don't know why I had Title I. It should have been Title II on this slide. But the different types of funding, because the Central Valley has to be scrappy, for lack of a better word, with the resources, because we're not, the Silicon Valley or the LA area that brings in a lot of revenue. And so we have to work together and bring in all the resources that are on the table and then some to make it work. So obviously our ELOP, ACES 21st Century, is a baseline. We use strong workforce dollars. The state of California now has that's K through 16 collaborative, not 12. So I'll have to fix this piece, but it's the K through 16 collaborative funding has been a big one, especially with our high school pipelines, which I'll get into shortly. LCFF funds, CTE funds, Title II funds, and then there's obviously a lot of residency funding, the classified staff, the teacher pathway funding. I have to look at it, but I think we got expanded learning included in that nuance somewhere. I don't know for sure, but that was what I thought we landed on this year. But I'm not an attorney or understand a lot of this, the policy stuff. But another one is AmeriCorps. And I'll go into that on the high school pipeline slide. But AmeriCorps is a big funding source and brings a lot of support systems. The CAI grants or apprenticeship work, and then any kind of local workforce funding or local measures. So an example would be, some communities really want to develop youth and provide professional learning opportunities and development for their youth and young adults. So there's random funding in there that we don't always think of our field isn't always expected to be the professionalizing industry or field, but we are. We're doing a lot of leadership development, people development, a lot of training. So those dollars should really be utilized as well, especially for the high school pathway piece. And then there's obviously teacher retention and diversity funding and Tara. So we're so grateful that you're here with us today, because it's a great, I would say, I would put all my money on it that this is a great return on investment for the state to look into, right? Okay, so before we go into local examples and discussion, I'm going to give a little bit more about high school pipeline piece quickly. So our new AmeriCorps dollars we'll be using to help get an education stipend and living stipend for high school students. And so what we started doing is partnering with the CTE programs, any kind of pathway program at the high schools. And then we start engaging their high school students along a whole year. So you would have like a cohort of high school students who we've done trainings for. We've done trainings for the CTE teachers and educators on what we do in expanded learning, what we bring to the table. And it also kind of slightly shows a different way or other competencies that need to be learned for future teachers, like the cultural competencies piece, right? So what we started doing was we decided to invite them to our Teaching Fellow Academies and our training, so they could start with the early integration. And this was exciting. So they were able to come to our conference, be in the keynote with the rest of our staff. And then you have staff in the chat box that are like, hey, welcome. This is so exciting. We're glad you're here. So they start to get a part of the family and they really start to love and fall in love with the work. We then in that same conference, we gave them the paraprofessional exam right then and there so that they can get para certified early on. We then showed them the application, how to do the application, and did like step-by-step with them to make sure that they actually could do it. Then the very next weekend, we set up interviews and a hiring fair. So the next weekend, those high school students, then we had our team, they got interviewed and they were selected, right then and there. And actually today we're doing our Future Fellows signing day. So we're inviting all of those that were hired at the hiring fair and were part of the high school pipeline piece. And we're getting them, having them sign their intent to work with us and making a big deal about it. So that way they can already, feel like they're a part of the organization now and start obviously with the recruitment piece. So along the whole year, what we found was that peer-to-peer mentorship from high school student to middle school student, it worked better than us doing peer-to-peer from our current staff to our high school students. That one we still need to figure out how to bridge because we're in rural communities. Just literal like transportation sometimes was a barrier, but inviting them to our trainings and getting them embedded was a more efficient way to get them in the peer-to-peer kind of mentorship piece. But in the funding we used for this was strong workforce dollars and K through 16 collaborative dollars. I'm trying to think of what else. I think ELOP can be used obviously for this work too. But that's a little bit on the high school piece. So really just opens up the funnel of folks to then come into the program. So then they'll work for us. We'll get them embedded with our training and our personal development, and then get them along their pathway with us, right? So that's like at 1. So we open up that funnel. And then they're learning in their CTE program and their classes in Ed 10, and they're getting dual enrollment in a lot of the times. So by the time they get into college, they're already getting that college course credit, which is great too, to really build that momentum and that culture of college going. So I'll stop there and ask if anyone wants to unmute to like dive deeper into any part of the section or the pathway.
Well, Malia, I put this in the chat, and as you know, in the materials Lupita put in the chat, including the Ed Trust, you know, getting teachers, getting a diverse teaching workforce is a national concern. So, you know, I just kind of have this question of, and sometimes the phrase is grow your own program. How, I mean, we can get this adopted elsewhere, including around the country. And what, I guess where does one start? Because you've really thought this through, built and expanded over the years. So whether it's the districts on this conversation here, or other districts in California, or you know, Michigan, South Carolina, wherever, how do we get started? And I don't mean to just put the question on you, but it seems like here's an approach documented by the Education Trust that after school's a natural fit. So how do we get folks going? And to the point you raised earlier, how do we convince local colleges and universities that this makes sense, as well as districts?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the question on my mind.
Thank you, Steve. And Lisa or Erin, I would invite any of you, I don't know, do we have anyone else on the call? I want to make sure I'm not excluding anyone. I think it's just us, right? Lisa or Erin, do you, what's coming up for you, and what's on your mind when it comes to doing this work? You know, is it where to start? Where do you think you would want to start? I'm curious. And I know a lot of folks are busy. Yeah, yay.
For us, we've got a pretty solid high school recruiting pipeline. One of the things that's happening in our district, we have a pretty large district, and they are hiring staff who are targeting diversity recruitment. And so there are staff that work for our human resources department who are actually full-time tasked with trying to identify people of color, people from certain neighborhoods, people of certain cultural backgrounds, and trying to recruit and retain those staff members. But like everything else in expanded learning, it's getting expanded learning to that table to be part of that conversation and say, you know, here's a place, here's an entry place where we can recruit. Because one of the things we're good at is recruiting people from our communities to work in our programs. But it's the next step where we support them and they go on to become teachers and administrators and, you know, serve the greater district that, you know, we need to be a part of that collaborative conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Erin. I'm like splicing the two. Yeah, it's a lot of times it just takes that one champion who has influence in that space that you're talking about when it comes to recruitment. And a lot of times there's multiple entities looking at that topic in communities too. So it may be the universities, it may be the districts. So our assistant superintendent of Fresno County superintendent of schools is a big fan and has really opened the door for us. Same thing with our superintendents. They get it and are excited, and then they help invite us into these spaces or to help leverage their name, right, to get us into certain conversations. It takes someone who, you know, a lot of these resources I shared, we found that really resonates with folks who are in the conversations of teacher recruitment and retention and diversification. So for you, do you know do you have any relationships with the folks at your district who are doing teacher recruitment?
We're building those. They're all new positions and it's new people and they're figuring out the work. And so, I mean, I think that part's coming, but it's just, I snagged the articles that were dropped in the chat and I'm
Good.
like, this is going to be a good conversation starter.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's also taking the time to learn what are they worried about, what are their strategies, and then making it make sense helping to make it make sense for them, because it may not make total sense to them sometimes. So finding someone who really can bridge after school and the language and what they care about on the district side. So it may be someone like you, Erin, who are you at the district? Right? So you're at the district, right? You're not a CBO coming to it. You're coming from the actual entity to say, hey, I really think we should consider this. So you may be a great leverage, tool. And if it's not one for us anyway, we talk to anyone and everyone who's willing to listen, because at the end of the day, it's for the kids and for the community. And so if you have a good relationship with a university partner who's having discussions with them, maybe they help leverage and open the door. It really just takes one or two who are influential in that space. And like I said, Erin, that might be you, depending on the relationship. The foundation, like we've done this for a while and we're always willing to talk to folks. So Erin, if you even wanted to chat sometime too, of like, hey, what, can I take that presentation, or what kind of presentation should I share? What kind of materials should I share? I can share with you what we typically share in those types of conversations that tend to land well. A lot of it's like the hours of experience and how your workforce diversity numbers, professional development, and exactly like what does that look like? What are the competencies that are happening? A lot of those really do resonate. And then you could point them to the national and state work as well to help say like, hey, it's not just me, like there's a lot of folks really looking at this work. So possibly that they would listen. A lot of folks just don't understand our field. I'm thinking about, Steve, your conversation is a lot of folks just don't realize what all is happening in expanded learning. And even in districts, their left arm doesn't talk to their right arm sometimes, right? And Erin, I'm sure you've experienced that. We're like, hey, we're doing a lot of good work over here. You may want to know what we're doing. And so is really educating what quality you all are doing. It could be parents too, right? You can do a focus group with parents or students. A lot of times we illuminate to our partners. We're like, what do the students want in their teachers? What are the families like? Are you doing focus groups? Like, why don't you ask your community what they want and what your teachers are lacking, right? You could get a hold of the surveys, the LCAP surveys, and see what families are saying in there. And kind of, I've done that in districts to kind of dissect what the parents are saying. It just starts.
Yep. Sorry to interrupt. I'd be interested what the network is, California network, since we've got two people from there doing in this space. There may be things in the May revise or ELOP. I don't know what from that Sacramento plans. Well, Bill, maybe you're not in Sacramento.
No, but
maybe nobody's in Sacramento. Except I don't know.
It is a new age, Steve. It is a new age. I do have some thoughts. First off, I would say that Erin's district, and Erin, I think I facilitated a meeting with Karen Ross from your district that spoke about your program where you recruit high school students so that they can work in your summer programs and provide them with paraprofessional support so they can pass the test, so on and so forth. So very impressed with the work you're doing at Elk Grove. Just want you to know. And I think that's really, in my mind, Steve, we are working on some things, something that Lupita and I are working now. We're going to do a webinar with Temescal. Ken is going to work with Temescal and Sam. But really where I think it begins with our ACES programs, reaching out and getting volunteers and setting up programs for the high school students to come and start working in the ACES programs, even if it's on a voluntary basis, right? but exposure to that potential. And even if you don't have an assets program, right, which would be much easier to perhaps recruit high school students to the ACES program. Every ACES program has a high school in its district and is attached to a high school. And so it's possible to be able to do that. And our funding for ACES goes where the highest free and reduced lunch is. That's where most of we have a great diverse group of young people that we serve in ACES programs. So to me, if you're trying to do diversity in teaching or diversity in educational pathway, if you're starting with recruiting the kids from your district and the kids in your community, you are actually designing at the margins, right? Which is a big equity piece. And people ask me, where are we going to find this diversified workforce? I'm like, they're the kids you're working with in ACES programs now. They're the kids you're working with now. That's where the diversified workforce is going to come from if we do it right. And I do hope that with the ELOP funding, which now has the attention of some district administrators, that they have to hire some people, right? We're not just the after school program that has to hire anybody anymore. Like, they have a big demand on hiring. So while there's no silver bullet in feeding our workforce, this would certainly be a huge it would be a significant contribution. And then we're getting kids on an educational pathway, and they may decide to stay, they may decide to go into social services, but really it's a great recruitment, because once the kids go to community college and they need a part-time job, hey, they've already served in the after school program. There's a great place for that job, right? So I think it really begins with trying to get our high school students doing some kind of work within our ACES programs. That's where your start's going to be, and from that will come the fruit of diversity and all of the things that we want moving forward from there.
Yeah, I think we found high school pipelines are a big leverage piece.
Yep.
Sorry, Lupita, go for it.
Oh no, just to add something that hasn't been elevated and kind of speak in this space, I think something that has come to mind for me is just the sharing of the learning, so that those questions can be a little less daunting or intimidating for folks to share out what their first steps are, how they approach building partnerships in their local areas. So I think with a lot of these pilots and folks coming in from different spots, maybe with how long they've been involved with the work, has been kind of pivotal. So everything I've learned too, just to make the link, I moved up in that pipeline, right? I was a site coordinator in the Elk Grove Unified School District, working alongside Erin. That made those links a little bit more possible. So how can I still, take that where it's not so much organization, but mission, right? To get this field the recognition that it kind of deserves, but then also put folks that are just coming into this work, maybe that previously were administrators, to get caught up in it, right? New positions are being created to do similar work. So how do we crosswalk things to link those so that it doesn't lose kind of people in the fold when they're just trying to advance themselves professionally, personally, but still want to have some sort of impact with kids in their future. So definitely being able to highlight and share in more digestible ways than final reports and briefings that might not be as accessible is something that's definitely going to be in the works, so that we can share out in local spaces for the state, California, but then also kind of, Steve, what you're talking about, right? This is a national conversation. So excited for the possibilities. And I'll surface back those resources that I shared in the chat in case anyone missed.
So one point, again, I think everyone knows, but Erin, I kind of work nationally, although I'm based in California. So people are talking about bringing high school students in part in other parts of the country, and particularly in rural areas, to help fill staffing gaps. But then some people say, well, but you need extra supervision. You can't just put a high school kid in the position. So how does that work out? You get a high school kid, let's say, recruited and working in elementary. Can it add to the staffing ratio, or do you still kind of, it's supplemental and not core staffing? I'm not sure. I'm framing
For
the question,
us,
right?
we have high school interns who work in our summer programs, and then and they are assigned to a credentialed teacher, so they help reduce the ratio in the room. But these aren't necessarily ACES programs, so we're not locked into the 20-to-1 in that case.
Okay.
But our summer programs actually are pretty typically even a smaller ratio than that. And then from there, So that's kind of their hands-on training where they, we have a full day training that they do before they start. Then they do a 4-week program where they're under the supervision of the teacher, and they'll run small groups and things like that on their own with the teacher there in the room. So they get their feet wet a bit. And then from there, we recruit those folks who are graduates of the summer program to work in our after school program.
Okay.
And then we have them do things like, the awful part of your day where you have 100 kids in the room, in the lunchroom getting their supper, and they're all there at once. And it's like, we've got high school kids who are pulling groups out that have finished eating and, doing an activity with them or something. So it's like, they're not necessarily counted in the ratio, but they're part of the team that helps kind of make things work. And then that program is overseen by an administrator. So that's the credentialed person. It's somebody with an administrative credential who oversees their work in after school. And then, so we started that last summer. So then this year, they've worked in our after school programs, and then they'll be back this summer. But it's only our students who are eligible for a work permit. So it's our 11th and 12th graders. Essentially, they're over 16. So now they're graduating, and they're, once they have their high school diploma next month, they will be eligible to come back and be hired as paraeducators, and they have a year of experience under their belt. So we would be happy to have them, and they're going to come in more experienced than a lot of the college students that we hire, or, other substitutes that we hire. So then they will be able to be fully counted in the ratio and have their own cohort. So, it's kind of like we invest in them up front, and they don't necessarily help us with the ratio, although staffing's been, such a challenge that it's been all we can do just to get warm bodies. So it's helpful to have them. And then, now we've got a year of experience under their belt, and they're interested in coming back, and they're comfortable there. Some of them we're losing because they're going away to college, but others are going to a local community college, and they're able to stay on. And so, that part's nice.
And we did something similar, Steve. What we did previously is we had students work, high school students do their volunteer service or work in the after school program, but it was benchmarked and structured. So the first 3 weeks, go over quickly, they were basically observing. The next 4 weeks, they were actively participating in activities. The last 3 weeks, they were delivering STEM lessons, which we had created and bought the materials for. So the students were actually doing some skill building along the way, which we hope and should have made them very comfortable. And then they did not count to the ratio in that particular piece. But then once they graduated with a successful paraprofessional test, they could come back and would have some experience, and perhaps more than some of the young people we would hire out of college.
Yeah, it's the investment in the upfront, right, for the long-term goals, but and it adds to quality too, and helps. We've seen with recruitment, right? So if you're in elementary school and you see the high school student that you recognize, or maybe it's your friend's big brother, right? It's a great recruitment strategy as well. And it really does open up the bucket to the pipeline work. Erin, I'm curious, in your district, do you have a residency program, a teacher residency program?
We are actually building one right now. We don't at present, but we're working on a CTE program that'll connect and have our students, be able to take academy courses for careers in teaching as part of their high school experience. And then, we can connect with some of the project learning they're doing there. And so, it's coming.
Yay. I mean, that's a great place to have conversations with your universities, because we found that the residency model for credentialing is probably the best model, as opposed to a traditional credential program, to align expanded learning and teacher prep on the latter half, right, of the pathway piece. And so if folks are starting to talk about a residency at your school district, then you can start linking up your high school students in your pathway with these residents who are about to, you know, go through their student teaching and really start to do some mentorship to really continue the pathway and the continuum. Because I think a lot of expanded learning folks, safe space is to stay in the high school recruitment. And I would encourage us all in expanded learning to realize that we can be a part of the whole pathway, and the whole pathway is also important, and there's movement and conversations happening. So I think we build upon our momentum and the great work that we're doing with high school programs and show that we can continue this type of partnership even later in the pathway, particularly a senior year in college in their like liberal studies program. And if we can get some clinical hours in expanded learning to shorten their time to graduation or even their residency, then we're really going to help the whole pathway too. It just depends on what the interest is of the district, but and that piece is a lot more technical and can be a lot more complicated, but is also a really important piece of the pie too. So Steve, kind of to your point, I think funding for high school students to get paid experiences, hands-on experiences and be developed is a great investment statewide and nationally to create those like youth leadership development kind of opportunities for important workforce or workforce shortages. So healthcare is one, obviously, but teaching, you know, preschool, whatever, TK, that would be a big one. And then really funding and creating funding specifically for and calling out expanded learning programs as a strategy, much like the teacher residency bucket, right? Or the classified staff line item. But if it was for expanded learning, then you would encourage LEAs and universities to go and work together, kind of like the K through 16 collaborative model, right? Where they stipulate you have to have K through 12, you have to have university, and you have to have employer at the table. I think something like that statewide and nationally would make a lot of sense. And there's a lot of healthcare legislation out there, healthcare pipelines that is very similar to teaching that we can look after in different funding models. I know in the state of California anyway, but
No, that's national. The need
Right.
for behavioral health or
yeah,
psychologists, social workers, community health workers, kind of a paraprofessional. There's with the discussion of the crisis in mental health and the
yeah.
substance use issues,
And the
definite need there too.
working with humans, like
Yeah.
I keep telling the funders, and I will continue telling the funders, you can't just give the money to the universities. Like, I'm sorry, but that's not where all the learning is happening. And then you wonder why people are burning out and they don't have the skill sets, right? To stay, or don't have the confidence to stay. Like, learning has to be hands-on too. And so, you know, creating funding sources that encourages or requires, right, hands-on experience, clinical hours, I think it would go a long way. And then obviously we're looking at the apprenticeship model too, which is exciting. And that's on the like first 2 years of college, I think is the biggest sweet spot that folks are looking at, right? Pre-apprenticeship being in high school. But we're finding that we may need to work with more of an online private school or a county office of ed as the issuer of a credential to work with us on, hey, do your coursework on the weekends or partially online. Let's co-create coursework that is half clinical and after school, or how do we grandfather in experience and competencies into this like teacher credential or your liberal studies degree. And some of the privates have more flexibility and willingness to do that. The commission is like hasn't, the commission is like, yeah, you can technically do that, but I don't think they want to open that can of worms yet. They're not that comfortable, because if they open it, then I think they're afraid of what's going to happen. And you get a lot of folks, Steve, who are saying like, well, what about quality? We need quality teacher prep. But if we don't have enough teachers or diverse teachers, then what is quality at that point, right? Like maybe we should try something new. So anyway, and Steve, on this PowerPoint, I have the slides I had created for the NCSL presentation on this one too, which was those recommendations we had put together. I kind of tailored it to be more statewide, but I have them on this presentation too. I can send to you as like a refresher. We talked about like where to start, right? Erin, is there any other questions on your end? Or anything that would be helpful, anything that you've run into that we can help you expand upon the amazing work you're already doing?
No, I think, I mean, you've given me stuff to think about as far as a conversation with Sac State, and, you know, like I'm trained to evaluate TPEs. I was thinking like, maybe I can get them to, you know, like, to approve me to go out and supervise folks who are in the, but if you want to share any of the resources, like when you were saying you had resources for, kind of leverage points to get into the conversation, I think that would be valuable. The articles are helpful. Thanks, Lupita. Also, it's good to see you, Lupita. We miss you in Elk Grove.
Yeah, Erin. And we are meeting with Sacramento State as well as a foundation. And so we can stay in the loop and keep you in the loop with the conversations with the universities, because it's the more the merrier, the more success and the more agencies successfully implementing this model, the better. Like to Steve's point, like how do we get people on board is like we need enough people and models to really get the ball going. So, you know, we can also continue to work with you on that piece, or, you know, if we meet with them, say, hey, we also, you know, have Erin out in Elk Grove who's doing amazing work. You should connect with her and her team, right? Yeah, and Steve and Lupita and Bill, I think for like Erin too, it might be nice for us to, like for the state to put together like who are the champions of this model in the different regions or big cities or the university, like the CSU system of who to reach out to. And then one to give to folks like Erin to say like, oh, hey, this is somewhere, a place where you can start having a conversation. Or a list of agencies across the state interested in this work according to the city. So if a university is interested, we can get them plugged in. Because I will say I've had multiple people in the LA area say, you know, who in this area is doing that work and how can I get connected? So I'm just thinking for folks like Erin, how do we help open those doors for our field? Because kind of Steve, to your point about how we move this work forward, it can't just come from the field. Like we have to get our institutions of higher education and our school districts to continuously uplift the importance of this model, because if not, I mean, we've been going to the field to uplift this for years. People are willing to listen, unfortunately, to folks that are already doing the work.
Yeah, and we've tried over 15 years to get CSU system-wide, but that kind of to embrace us, and sometimes they do, but like you have said, the campuses are very independent, as academics are. So it'd be good to, start mapping out where the champions are and the pilots beyond the counties you cover, for sure. And maybe it seemed that Tara I don't know if people were working with her before today, but she seems to be leaving pretty excited and
Yes.
wants to do follow-up. And so that may, I'm not quite sure what the teacher and leader office is within CDE, but it sounds important. So
Steve, I was
maybe,
going to send an email. Do you want me to, Steve, Bill, Lupita, do you want me to include you three in that email chain to her?
yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, just to start that combo.
Yeah,
And
she
then
put in the chat, she'd be glad to talk to me, but I think a group conversation would make sense. Yeah, if we can, I don't even know what floor of the building she's on, but if we could, which one? Lupita, do you know?
No, I was saying, right, I'm taking vigorous notes because I'm a researcher. I go into into the details.
it might be the new office that they have created because of this very issue,
She didn't.
and with the new initiatives.
Yeah, so that would be, because that's finding champions within the State Department of Education that work with the Teacher Credentialing Commission that then maybe can get us access to the higher education community would be great. So yeah, if you're following up with her, let's make it a group effort.
Cool.
Teacher and Leader Policy Office, okay.
Awesome. Is there any other thoughts or questions for the group? And Erin, I'll put together some resources that we've found, or that we share, so then you can think of like, okay, I can share my version of these materials. So it's like the list of like your trainings, or a one pager about your high school pipeline program, things like that. So hopefully you go armed with the information that's going to get them excited, and as excited as we are about the work you're doing. All right, anything else for the good of the order? All
Well,
right.
congratulations to the CAN team for pulling this together today. I heard rumors of thousands registering. And in the morning breakout, there were 200 something, and the one I was in, that's
Yeah.
pretty awesome.
Yeah, Steve, I think I saw it was close to 800 out of the 1,300 by lunchtime, right about there. There may have been more that came in on the PM side, but yeah. Pretty well attended, and I won't take any credit for it. There are a whole lot of great people in the organization that did a whole lot more work than Bill did. I'll tell you that. I'm just the new guy on the block, and Lupita would be one of them. And Malia, as always, awesome work, awesome presentation. I learn something every time I talk to you, so thank you.
Yay, I'm glad. Thanks for joining, and Echo CAN team. This convening is amazing, and the work you're doing for the state to support big work is exciting. And Erin, thanks for joining and sharing about your experiences and what you're doing, because I learn every time I get invited to speak in this space, and we all make each other better, right? Which is awesome. And I love that about our field. It's not competitive like other fields. I mean, yes, we have our little things, but man, other industries don't play nice together. And it's unfortunate because it's about our